Privet, Katila, Wanning Ruski Desu, and today we have two people who are intellectual giants beyond me. Or I'm being a bit too flattery, but yeah, these guys are. I feel honored to have them. They're two of the biggest, really big YouTubers. I've had Steve on my channel before, Steve and Michael Davis, and I have a brand new guest, actual justice warrior, or Sean as he's commonly known. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic. How are you?
Doing great, as far as the circumstances can be. What about you, Sean?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on. And I think we've been on my channel before.
Yeah, we've kind of been like in intermediary, the intermediaries, like between we've been in the same live stream before, but I think not on like each other's channels. I don't think, but maybe we have. But so today, what this live stream is about is basically we're going to be discussing a few things, two things specifically about why Bernie Sanders and his campaign failed, and what exactly went wrong, and what was the miscalculations, and then from there it would ramp off to what exactly are the fundamental failures of the progressive left in general. Like, what are their fallacies? What they're we're basically going to try to deconstruct their worldview. And these two are very actual very they're some of the biggest heavyweights against the progressive left, which is why I've invited them on. So without further ado, before we start, just in case people who are watching don't know who you guys are, explain who. So I guess I've had Steve on, but he's a libertarian anti-populist. Do you want to go into that? Just explain who you are, just for a few seconds.
Yeah, my name's Steve. Scuba Steve, as I'm often called. My channel is just my full name, Stephen Michael Davis. I am a libertarian, but I'm very much pro-America. I'm very much anti-populism because I think groups of people don't produce great decisions, especially at the ballot box. I definitely spend most of my time criticizing the progressive left. That's most of what I watch on YouTube, but I also criticize the right too. I think that's fair to say.
And then we have a Sean, or actual justice warrior, the heavyweight himself. So describe who exactly, what you're about, kind of a little taste of what your ideological framework is and all that.
So I'll steal something from Stephen. I've adopted the anti-populist mindset. I'm not a believer in that. I'm libertarian leaning. I cover a lot of things having to do with the progressive left and the faults of especially their media figures and how they misstate certain things that basically builds up a narrative for how if they win, it's because they were right all along, and if they lose, it's due to the fact that they were somehow cheated. I'm a known Biden pusher, apparently, because apparently saying somebody's going to win means you support him. Yeah, that's basically it. There's nothing else important about me.
I actually did vote for Biden in the Minnesota primary. And I should say I'm a former progressive. I've only been a libertarian for 5 years or so.
I also mentioned that Sean's also apparently a fortune teller, right? Is that correct? His biggest prediction that he's seen in his crystal ball is that Elizabeth Warren might be the VP for Biden. So I don't know either way. I still think it might be some Midwestern type of person, like some Michigan person or Amy Klobuchar. But he's apparently been right every single time. So if you want to bet on it.
only Cenk Uygur has been right every single time.
He told us that that the Democrats would nominate a progressive in 2020. So I guess Joe Biden's a progressive.
Dang, trench warfare. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. But no, I'm not a fortune teller. And to be clear, my Warren prediction is a 75% if I could hedge a little bit. But the Biden thing, that's not fortune telling. I laid out my reasoning consistently on that, and it happened very similar to the way I thought it would happen.
Yeah. So speaking of kind of the Biden stuff in the 2020. So before we start there, let me quickly write all the facts I wanted to talk about. So we're going to start off with Bernie himself, kind of the main vehicle of this whole progressive movement, the politician that's kind of emerges from this whole the progressive left. So I'm going to let each of you go into as much as you want. I'll talk to each of you about what exactly you thought Bernie did. Like, why did he lose, basically? So
Okay.
let's see who wants to go first.
I'll just start us off.
Awesome.
So let's recap what happened. So Pete Buttigieg won Iowa just barely after all sorts of shenanigans with the app and whatnot, and we can revisit that. I don't really think that's important, but then Bernie Sanders won Iowa or New Hampshire, excuse me, and then he won Nevada by a lot. So after 2 out of 3 contests, Bernie Sanders finished second in Iowa. We were staring down the barrel of a Bernie Sanders nomination in the Democratic Party. Then Jim Clyburn endorses Joe Biden in South Carolina. James Clyburn is a very influential congressman down there. Joe Biden steamrolls Bernie in South Carolina. Then all of a sudden, Buttigieg, Klobuchar drop out, and the path is clear for Biden. It's clear at this point that Bloomberg, nobody gives a shit about him. He spent $875 million and has dick to show for it. 55 delegates.
He did get America Samoa, though.
Yeah, that's true.
American Samoa.
Yeah.
Can't forget that.
Really goes to show that you can buy elections and that we need to get big money out of politics, because if Bloomberg can get 55 delegates with $875 million, then what can't you do with money in this country? So, I mean, basically what happened, and the Bernie people said this explicitly, and there are clips of them online saying this, they totally depended on a fractured field. They never planned to win a majority. They didn't think they could win a majority. They were planning to game the rules to get a majority of delegates. And go figure, people dropped out when they realized they didn't have a chance. And so I think the fact of the matter is the majority of Democratic primary voters didn't want Bernie Sanders as their nominee. They may like him. They may like his rhetoric. They may think some of his policies are good, but they prefer Biden, who they know much better and who has that Obama shine on him.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, that's what happens.
Right. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think it's a little bit different because at some point the Bernie Sanders base thought that Bernie was going to win outright because the odds at 538 had him leading in literally every state, as the leader. I'm sure at the beginning, after Iowa and New Hampshire, they thought he was going to win the plurality, basically pull a Trump, but the Democratic primary works differently. And but at some point they thought he was going to be the outright majority, because remember, it was nobody getting the majority, then Bernie, and then nobody else in sight in terms of odds. But what happened was, and Stephen has it right, is Biden won South Carolina, and he was strong in South Carolina the whole way throughout, even before Clyburn, although the timing of that suggests that the Clyburn endorsement helps. But Joe Biden had the correct strategy in the Democratic primary. Like, you have to look at the order of the states and who's strong in those states in terms of demographics and everything. And I've said a million times, Joe Biden never lost a percentage point of Black support throughout this whole primary process. He was hanging around at 39%. And Iowa, New Hampshire, then Nevada, then it's South Carolina, and Super Tuesday, half of those states are Southern Democratic primary states. So, like, if you hold that group and you win out on Super Tuesday, like Biden did, then all the momentum, everything that happened before doesn't matter. And a similar thing happened with Bill Clinton. He didn't win until, I believe it was Georgia, because the order was different there. So, Bernie did not campaign for the correct demographic of people in order to win, to build momentum. And Bernie lost a lot of white working class people. If you look at the Michigan results and the other Midwestern states that he won over Hillary, Biden's numbers among white working class people are insanely higher than Hillary Clinton's.
So that, for me, you guys kind of touched on a lot of the kind of the same sentiments that I were thinking about. So even one thing I'll add on with Steve is that I think I didn't see this, I'll admit, in the beginning, but looking back on it, there were some signs already, even when Bernie was steamrolling. Well, not steamrolling, just like barely lost in Iowa, won in New Hampshire, steamrolled in Nevada. There was already signs that Bernie was a weaker candidate. You know, so fundamental. Oh yeah, and fundamentally, there's a few things that happen. So first of all, they'll admit this. First of all, their whole idea that people will the youth will swamp the polls. That was completely wrong. It was actually all old people that voted. Well, there's actually, they see it as more of a patriotic duty. Well, and the same. So their idea that it would just get new people to vote. Another thing is, first, as Sean said, the white working class voters, as we figured out, is basically when they voted for Bernie, it was more of an anti-Hillary vote. It's not like this is why I think we're going to talk probably about this later, which is why I think this Biden's a lot more stronger going into the general than Hillary was. But a lot of this, the reason why Bernie was so competitive all the way throughout most of in 2016 was because of these like white rural people voting, even though when he got completely swamped, like even when he was basically when Clinton was basically going to be the nominee, they still voted for him because they just didn't like Hillary at all. It wasn't his socialism that got them on board. It wasn't like the West Virginia people and voted for him, even though they considered themselves conservative Democrats, they just didn't like Hillary. And then the other thing is obviously, the black people, they voted, they liked Clinton and they liked Biden. They cucked Bernie again twice. And, that's just, that's just the, if you could point to one thing in 2016 that kneecapped Bernie, it's not necessarily, the DNC. I will admit the DNC was biased in 2016, but the main reason why he lost in 2016 was the black vote. That's like, if Bernie would have been the nominee if it wasn't for the black vote. And then now in 2020, the same thing, except then he lost the white working class vote. The only thing he did gain was like the Latino vote. And so a combination of the demo, and also the idea of Michael Tracy made a good point that the Democrats have hyped up Trump as being this authoritarian person who's going to who's like putting kids in cages, and he's like the next bad he's just this goon of Russian corruption, and has to be removed. So the Democratic base they want someone who's perceived as electable, and I mean not even just perceived. Biden is more electable than Sanders, and also the policies of progressivism, the social, the what they call, we're just simply social democratic. It's actually, they might be fine with single payer, but they much more prefer public option. They might be, so they might be fine with it with certain progressive, but they were more preferring more moderate policies. And not only do they prefer more moderate policies, they preferred an electable candidate who could beat Trump. So, and they perceive Biden as that person. So that's kind of my view on why Bernie lost.
Right.
Guys, got any thoughts on it?
I completely agree with a lot of that, but also Bernie ran a poor campaign. Bernie had a huge money advantage, except for when Michael Bloomberg showed up. And this idea that the Democrats, look, I'm sure they discussed their prospects going forward with the Biden team because they all dropped out and endorsed Biden. But the idea that Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and like whichever one of these other candidates, the idea that they
Bloody Monday.
Yeah, but the idea that they didn't have to drop out is absurd.
Yeah.
Pete Buttigieg was polling at 0% among black voters going into Super Tuesday. He had no chance of the nomination. He had to knock Biden out with that first win in Iowa. Amy Klobuchar was polling at 0% with black voters. And I'm, within the margin of error, maybe they have 1 or 2 percentage points. There's no way that they could have pulled it off. So they had to drop out after South Carolina. And Biden overperformed dramatically in South Carolina. But the loss is 100% on Bernie Sanders. Bernie, honestly, the DNC obviously didn't want Bernie. They didn't want him in 2016. They didn't want him in 2020. But if you look at the 2016 and 2020 and you forget about their intentions, their actions actually helped Bernie, of the Democratic Party. They moved California up. The only solace Bernie had in Super Tuesday was California. And that was moved up. It wasn't like that before. They moved that up maybe to mess with Bernie Sanders because Hillary won California overwhelmingly. but it ended up going to Sanders, and it was his only like life preserver on Super Tuesday. But the Sanders campaign ran a disastrous campaign. Obviously, Warren not dropping out, like hanging around, probably hurt Bernie. But Bernie praising Fidel Castro right in the lead up to the Florida primary. Like, what did you expect to happen when you did that?
But you don't understand. I bet the Cubans in Florida would have they would have understood that Castro like made them all illiterate, so they probably would have forgave Castro. What do you guys think of so if you look at, I mean, I focus mostly on Kyle, but I've seen a lot of progressives say that, well, like Kyle says this explicitly, that if it wasn't for people like Amy Klobuchar endorsing Biden, then Bernie would have ran away with the nomination. It was just and so what do you guys think of that? Like, it was, how Biden won South Carolina and then everyone started dropping out and endorsing him. If do you think that actually, like, it was already, because to me, I mean, I think we all probably would agree with this, but it was to me, it was a foregone conclusion, even if Amy and Pete didn't endorse Biden. It's not like, and it would have already helped. Biden would have already won anyway, because the seeds were already there. Like, for example, in New Hampshire, this is like the perfect state. It's a very independent-minded state. Like, it's not like a core it's a very white working class type of place. And yes, I know the field split, but Bernie only won like 1 or 2% above the second place finish. This isn't like the 30-40 point landslide he landslided Hillary in. And I know it's still fractured, but there's something to say there. And so what do you got? How would you guys respond to like this argument that it was the Obama orchestrated everyone to drop out and then endorse Biden to give him so he could survive or something like that?
Well, first of all, let me just say to Sean's point about California, when they moved California up, there's a video of Cenk Uygur saying that they're doing this to help Kamala Harris. He's like, oh, they're already rigging it against Bernie. And go figure, it worked out to Bernie Sanders' favor, and he didn't say a peep about it. So whenever you hear Bernie Sanders fans complain about the rules, know that their sense of a fair rule is a rule that benefits them. Yeah. And an unfair rule is a rule that doesn't benefit them. They think that legitimate democracy ends in them winning. So that's where they're coming from.
Well, because if it doesn't, it's because it's rigged, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Politics.
Kyle has said this, all things being equal, we win. Meaning if he didn't win, then all things were unequal and it didn't count for some reason. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. What was the other thing you were talking about?
How would you respond to like Kyle's point that it was, when Obama
Bloody Monday. You want to know about Bloody Monday?
So,
okay.
Kind of your thoughts on it was the endorsements that got Biden over the edge.
First of all, it's taken for granted that Obama orchestrated all those moves. And this comes from 2 New York Times articles about what Obama did. First of all, he called Pete Buttigieg after he dropped out. And according to that article, he never told him to endorse Biden. He just told him, hey, you have a lot of influence. He never called Amy Klobuchar, not that we know of anyways. There's no evidence he called Beto O'Rourke. He did call Bernie Sanders 4 times after, Super Tuesday Part 2. And he did encourage Bernie Sanders to drop out. But, that's on Bernie Sanders if you don't like that. How much of an effect did that have on Super Tuesday? Buttigieg dropping out, Klobuchar dropping out? I guess we'll never know. Klobuchar, I feel like would have won Minnesota, but
say that, yeah.
But then again, Elizabeth Warren didn't win Massachusetts, and Biden was in. Would they have eaten into Bernie's or Biden's lead? Probably, I'm guessing, but it was obvious that neither of them were going to win. And it was obvious that if they were dropping out, they weren't going to endorse Bernie. So they just did what was logical. There's nothing illegitimate about that. If Bernie was better at institutional politics and courting endorsements, things could have gone differently, but they didn't.
Right. Well, he got Dick Van Dyke, though.
That's true, yeah.
But the follow-up on Steve's point about the endorsements, it is funny to see the people who say endorsements don't matter, except when they lose and then they matter.
Yeah.
But to that point, Buttigieg had to drop out because he was not polling well in Indiana. Klobuchar is the one that you can argue for because she it looked like she was going to win Minnesota, and she's very popular in Minnesota, even though she's considered a corporate centrist Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
But that one matters. That's why Klobuchar has moved up in my odds to like 20% VP slot for Biden, because she did drop out when she didn't necessarily have to and endorse Biden. Because a general rule in politics, if you think you're going to lose your home state, then you got to get out, because then you're done. You have nothing. You're embarrassed. You have no strength going forward. That's why Warren's actions were so tricky. But I think Biden won so overwhelmingly in South Carolina that he had the momentum going forward. And a lot of these early primaries are about momentum, not necessarily anything else.
Someone made a good point in the chat. Like, we were talking about like, if it wasn't for if Pete and Amy were still in the race, they would have taken votes away from Biden. Someone made a good point. Said also important to remember Bloomberg was still in on Super Tuesday and depressed Biden's vote. And
well, another thing I just want to jump in real quick. Mm-hmm. Prior to this, there were lots of media reports about how, the moderate candidates got X amount of vote and Bernie Sanders got less than that. And progressives scoffed at that. They're like, you can't do that. That's jackass math. And then after Super Tuesday, go figure, they do the jackass math. And
they begged Warren to drop out based on that jackass math.
All of a sudden and some of them copped to it, I will admit. Some of them owned up to it. Yeah, it turns out that was right. Some of them just kind of seamlessly transitioned into that mattering all of a sudden. I want to say one thing before you jump in here, Ruski. Mm-hmm. There's an article in the Bulwark by Tim Miller that I read earlier today. It's about the Bernie Sanders campaign. He said basically the Bernie people bought their own bullshit. And basically, I talk on my channel sometimes about how wish thinking doesn't really help you in politics. It's one of the reasons I find it so contemptible. But if you believe that everybody really loves your message and everybody really wants what you want, you're going to stick to that. And as far as I can tell, Bernie and his supporters and the people who bought into his campaign really thought that, the only reason we lost last time is because the DNC rigged it because, the DNC, Hillary Clinton had veto power over their press releases and Donna Brazile gave them a question or whatever. Were it not for that, those 3.5 million people would have voted for Bernie. Right. If you really buy that, then you think you don't need to change your strategy, and it really prevents you from reflecting upon your own flaws. So, had they done things differently and played more of the institutional game that progressives don't love, but is part and parcel of our politics, then maybe things would have gone differently.
Right. And to double up on that point, I've been making videos about this recently about the healthcare polling, which is an issue that, across the progressive media, they have proclaimed victory on winning it. And there's a good Market Watch article which sums up the polling, basically saying that the polling indicates that we're at the beginning of a Medicare for All discussion, nowhere near the conclusion. But if you just look at the polling, it just shows that people don't know what Medicare for All is. They think Medicare sounds good, all sounds good, so they vote for that. They don't know what a national healthcare plan. Like when they answer that question, they think it's like, should America have a national healthcare plan? They think, yeah, there should be a plan in the nation for healthcare. And when you delve into those numbers, you find out that all the attacks that they laid out against Bernie on stage, incredibly effective. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden's proposal of adding to Obamacare among Democrats, incredibly popular, and one-to-one comparison beats Sanders. Medicare buy-ins, all that is way more popular than Sanders supporters. So like they're acting like they won. They're acting like the DNC cheated. That's why they didn't win in 2016, but in reality they won. And they're acting like that on individual issues when you really need to be arguing your point on those issues. Yeah. So they really, bought their own nonsense, 100%.
And another point on them buying their own bullshit. You'll notice that the polling is only authentic. It's the only real reflective of real will of American people when it suits their interpretation. When those numbers go down when people attack it. Well, that's just because they've been brainwashed. Well, who's to say which is the real opinion of the American people? I don't know how you know that. I don't know how they know that.
And I think also one thing that, as we were mentioning earlier about, if the endorsements somehow, made Biden win. I mean, that even if that was true, that's shooting themselves in the foot. Like if people are voting based on like, we're going to win because our policies, if we just run on pure policy and everyone had equal amount of money, we would win. Because that's, our policies are popular. But
Right.
you know, I mean, if people were going to vote for Bernie and then like, oh yeah, Amy Klobuchar dropped out and endorsed Biden, okay, never mind, I'm going to vote for Biden now. It seems like, you know, even if your policy is popular, this whole about, you know, if your whole theory of getting elected is completely wrong, you know, the idea of like running on progressive platform and then that would somehow win because people are more, I guess, driven based on other factors than just that. So it looks like they're also shooting themselves on the foot by in that point.
I've actually described the Sanders campaign as repeatedly shooting themselves in the foot and then wondering why there's bloody footprints everywhere. So I'm happy to hear that analogy. But yeah, and by the way, the endorsements might have had an impact and the dropping out might have had an impact because Biden won overwhelmingly in voters that made up their mind 36 hours going into the polls. But the early voting and everything the Democrats advocated for significantly favored Bernie. Like whether he won early voting or not, he split it with candidates who dropped out by the time the in-person voting happened. So, you know, those last minute endorsements, they might seem like they're great and fantastic, but if Pete Buttigieg dropped out yesterday and voting's tomorrow and you already mailed in your ballot 2 weeks ago, then that's a wasted vote basically. So that all cut in favor of Bernie still pulling it off. He just didn't because his campaign was not that good. He was not that appealing of a candidate.
So I watched this live stream. You know, I sat through it. I sat through this like hour and a half long live stream from Kyle where he explained what went wrong. And I kind of jotted down some notes that we could. So I think this is sort of the views of certain. I mean, you guys could bring up some from other progressives that they brought up why Bernie lost, and we could address them now that we've kind of explained why we thought Bernie lost. So a few things he said that. So from my interpretation for what Kyle, it's not necessarily the endorsements because it was the media swarm. He called like something like, it's like, it was all the good media that, you know, he got so much endorsements that people were just overwhelmed and that like, oh Amy and Pete endorsed him. Oh my God, that's I'm going to vote for Biden now. And, you know, it was the good. And he basically says the media was biased against Bernie as usual. That's the common thing. And then so he said that if the media was more neutral, we would win. He said that he actually criticized Bernie, believe it or not. And that might be hard to, you know, contemplate, but he actually criticized Bernie. He said, you know, because Bernie, you guys remember, there was this article about saying, oh, Joe Biden's corrupt, and then Bernie's like, we can't, you know, I'm a friend with Joe, you can't accuse him of being corrupt. Well, Kyle said that if Bernie wasn't kneecapping and being so soft on Biden and like calling him out, you know, people would have turned away from Biden once they realized he was, you know, corrupt and everything, but he was being too soft. And then, so he said Iowa was rigged. That didn't count. And then he said, and then after that, he actually kind of changed his tune. So now it's not like policies are going to win; it's electability. Now now his being argument is that if Bernie after Super Tuesday convinced everyone that he was the most electable candidate, that he would have won. And so how do you guys? I mean, what do you guys think about that? That if only I think Steve, you've seen it. I don't like because you watch Kyle a lot.
Yeah.
You've seen how he's because his idea is like if only after Super Tuesday after he got schlonked, you know, if he only convinced voters that he was if he kept saying he was electable and Joe Biden was Hillary Clinton and you know everything like that, people would have seen a different perspective and voted for because I think he understands that it was the Democratic. First of all, he kind of ignores. He was on Glenn Greenwald's show, and like they were being very like instead of saying like he lost the white vote or like the white working class vote, he's like he lost the rural vote. You know he's trying to be kind of tiptoeing around it. But I think they understand that like it was less of a policy and more of a beating Donald Trump thing. So he's like, okay, so now that's the new paradigm. Bernie, this is what Bernie had to do, and if Bernie did that after Super Tuesday, he would have, somehow won. What do you guys think about that?
So 3 points. First of all, Kyle loves to say talk about how we're all secretly progressives and how America really buys into the progressive agenda. Mm-hmm. If people can be tricked into voting, against the progressive agenda by some news stories, well, then we're not really all progressives now, are we? And then now, as far as blaming the media goes, I think progressives are giving conservatives a run for their money. There's this great clip, I've played it on my channel before, from Chris Steyerwalt, the digital news editor of Fox News. And he goes, here's the problem with conservatives reflexively blaming the media. And I believe this applies to progressives as well. It's like, and you'll like this, Ruski, it's like blaming the Russian winters for why Napoleon was defeated or why Hitler was defeated. It's like, and his point is, no, it snows in Russia every year. You failed to prepare for that. Yeah, the media matters. How the media covers a candidate matters. You failed to prepare for that, Bernie. You should have played the media better. If in a world where the media matters, which is our world, then how you play the media dictates how good of a candidate you are. And Bernie failed to play that game. And so, yeah, what are you going to do? You need to, it's easy now in retrospect to say that, but he should have thought about that beforehand. And also, finally, we'll have to see after the election really how bad the coverage was for Bernie Sanders. I know that his fans will cherry pick stories and say, oh, look at the media bias. They did that in 2016 too. There's a Harvard study about the media coverage of 2016. Bernie Sanders got the most favorable coverage. So, wait and see. It may be the case that the studies will show in aggregate, yeah, Bernie got the most negative press, but we'll have to see.
It's also when he started looking like he was being the front runner, like one thing they point out, they're like, well, they started being so critical of him. It's like, well, yeah, that's what happens when you become front runner. They did that with Elizabeth Warren. She got tanked after they started criticizing her healthcare plan. So it's like if you start being seen as the front runner, you start getting criticized. That's just that's just the name of the thing. And this is why I don't really get like all the other Democrats were like, we can't be attacking each other. This is what Donald Trump wants. It's like, first of all, you're in a primary, you're supposed to be attacking each other. And, no one, it actually prepares you for during the general election. And, if you can't be like, well, if the media, I just wish the media was fair. Because as you mentioned, it's, the media is as the media, the media is what the media is. And, Trump, one thing I will give Trump on is that, he knows the media doesn't like him. And he just attacks it, more than, sometimes he's being overly assholish about it, but, being a bit too temper tantrum about it. But, he understands that the media is biased. He can't just wish that it wasn't. So he's like, okay, well, you're all fake, all this, all that. So he knows how to combat it. But Bernie just doesn't know that. And that's why, you can't just wish for a new reality, as you mentioned.
So the electability thing, in my opinion, is a bit of a cop-out because Kyle's like, he was winning in electability before. Like, you're more electable when you win elections. Bernie lost the election, therefore he's less electable. But that's it's like a bit, it's not saying anything of substance. The media is interesting. However, like, how soon do we forget that Joe Biden did not get positive media coverage throughout this primary process? Old, doddering. He was basically like, the best media coverage that Biden got throughout the majority of this primary is when the media was ignoring Joe Biden. They propped up Cory Booker briefly. He didn't catch on in the polls. They propped up Kamala Harris in the beginning. She was the front runner for a little while. The media horsed it for Elizabeth Warren. They went after it for Amy Klobuchar. They pumped up Pete Buttigieg. The better example of somebody who was cut out of favor due to media performance is Beto O'Rourke compared to Pete Buttigieg, because Beto O'Rourke decided he was only going to do local and not national news. Pete Buttigieg took the opposite, and if you appear on their programs, they're going to treat you nicer. That's how you play the media better. That's how Pete Buttigieg, a crummy mayor from a town of that's very small that can't even win a statewide election, got propped up so much by the media. But as soon as you rise like close to the sun, the heat melts your wings and you fall back down. Buttigieg got hit with his scandals as he rose up. Sanders got hit with his scandals as it was apparent that he was the front runner. And Joe Biden was perceived as having a dead campaign, and the media reported like he had a dead campaign. The perception was his campaign was dead, and he still pulled it off. So I don't think the media necessarily is the overarching factor, because they weren't that positive with Biden. They were negative with Bernie at times, but like, let's be honest, the candidates are the problems, because Elizabeth Warren, 0 Pocahontas attacks in the debates. Even worse than that, maybe you say that's a Donald Trump move, so they're not going to do it. They never harped and like kept attacking her on the fact that she would not say the word taxes during the debate. She would always alternate to costs, and nobody called her out on it through the entire process. Bernie Sanders, how long did it take them to bring up his issues with communism? Like, never happened until Mike Bloomberg showed up on the debate stage. Pete Buttigieg, none of his scandals got airtime. Joe Biden's complete inability to talk, never referenced on the debate stage. Like, the media, the candidates were soft on each other throughout the process. And if Trump wins, it's going to be because he finds an attack that was not discovered in the primary and utilized it. So Bernie, not only was Bernie soft on Biden and soft on all these other candidates, all he said was, you got donations from 40 billionaires. Like, that was his strongest attack in the primary. But all the candidates were soft on each other, and they fell because even with that softness, they weren't good candidates.
And another thing is that they want to kind of like, in terms of the electability thing, what Kyle mentioned also that I have in my notes here is that he's like, what Bernie should have done is called Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, the safe, you might think he's the safe option, but the safe option was Hillary, and we lost with her, and we lost with John Kerry, that never. And then he's like, you have to talk about how you're FDR, and FDR won 4 times, and so he always goes back to FDR, and I really like this quote from Steve. He said, we can't talk about, it's the 90s were 30 years ago, it's a whole new era. Blah blah blah. But now we have to go back like 80 years to like FDR's time to like apparently that's relevant. It's the same. So it's so it's and Bill Clinton. Like if you're gonna talk about like, I'm FDR. Well, if Biden could have just said, well, I'm Bill Clinton. And I won a lot. So it's he feels like that if we're gonna get to this once we actually get to the fundamental underpinnings of why the progressive left is wrong. But it's the idea that they're actually popular, that's the big thing. So they think that if and the way he's trying to spin it is that he's, in terms of electability, is that Biden, once Biden gets exposed as, and then this is almost borderline. Like I'm not going to say he's like slandering him, but he's like, Joe Biden is a war criminal. He's a rapist. He's a what are some other, like, these are like literal, like, oh my gosh, this is it's the internet, people kind of over exaggerate who you are all the time, but this is too much. And so in terms of the electability, in terms of like, well, are they actually popular? They want to concede that all we want is like Norway. We just want Norway to be in America. And you actually, if you look at like things that he's actually talked about, like he's actually like, they're not just social democrats. If you look at what Kyle has talked about, he's called private business. It's just, an owner having like say 5 employees and everything. He calls them like mini tyrannies, calls them like fiefdoms. This is a Marxist point of view. And, he always talks about, how the, another thing he says that he's like, the government should subsidize worker-owned co-ops. It's like for no other reason. Like he doesn't explain why, like he doesn't explain why that should be the case. It's just like, well, because fundamentally the underpinning is that private property and private business is just somehow some sort of evil thing, and workers owning it is somehow a better alternative for some reason. And then he always talks about like, Richard Wolff. They always trot this guy out. It's kind of like those creationists or climate change deniers where they like bring out like some guy who has a degree in like science or something, but like he's like one out of like 100 people who actually believe so they're like, okay, he has credentials, so we're just going to focus on him. So because he's like the only like Marxist professor who's like actually has some sort of like credentials. So, but you don't trot him out. It's like me trotting out some guy, who's in favor of like fascism. It's like, well, I mean, so it's, if you try to bring up someone like Richard Wolff, you're kind of being sympathetic. And then Kyle admitted this in his argument. He said that, I took a political compass test. They put me as a libertarian socialist. And so I was like, okay, well, that's stupid. And then another thing I would also mention is that now Kyle is not as guilty as this as many other progressives are, but people vote for more than just economics. There's a reason why like right-wing populists win when it comes to because there's more to like life than just pure economics. There's culture and everything like that. So, they're not in favor of reparations. They're not in favor of, decriminalizing border crossings. They're not in favor of banning private. They're not in favor of like transgender children. That isn't something that they, the American people, this might be very woke type, but they're not. And, so it's so it's not just economic. They always focus on economics, and they don't always focus on and social stuff as well. But
I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that they always focus on economics, because no matter what a progressive leftist is talking about, they're talking morality. Like I experienced this when I went through the exact polling in a Kyle Kalinske video, and all the comments were like, but you're still immoral. And these like, it's not economically based, but I get your point. There's culture. There's like a cultural significance to a candidate. And there's also personality. And I remember Cenk had a spaz attack because somebody suggested that people vote for Bernie because they like him. What do you think authenticity is? Like, that's your perception of likability. Right. And a bunch of my followers have popped into the thing asking different questions. If you pull them up, I'll answer them, but I'm going to ignore them. It's your channel, your time, sir.
Hey, Sean, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Why do you want Kyle's dad to die?
Have you seen the there's a clip I've seen the juxtaposition.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be in my next video. It's
the Destiny video. Have you seen that?
Yeah, yes, I have.
I've seen those two clips before, separate, because Kyle, he made that point a while ago, and it's I feel bad. Like, Kyle did a bad thing, but I feel bad like talking about his father that passed away.
Yeah.
But he said that his dad went to a chiropractor recently because he had no insurance and he had lung cancer. But in the past, when he described him, it was a heavy smoker that didn't believe in doctors. So like Medicare for all wouldn't have saved him.
I remember there was like from Jack and speaking of like media, like all the media is biased, everything like that. He's like, he mentioned, like, he's like, check out these neutral papers. He like brings out like Current Affairs and Jacobin. It's like, yeah, sure.
Listen, I have to point this out because it is absurd, and it's quick. The fact that Kyle is saying the media is biased and Cenk Uygur, the media is biased. You guys literally came together to form an organization to draft candidates to run for office, then promoted them on your outlets, no matter what they did. Like, look at their headlines on their handpicked candidates. Yeah. It's always AOC owns everything and destroys everyone all the time. Like, what the hell is who's CNN, like MSNBC, definitely have their leanings, like who they support. But show me where they picked a candidate, ran them for office, like set up an infrastructure to support them. I'll wait.
Right. Also, look at the way they talk about the media. First of all, they get on the media like, oh, they smeared us. Cenk got all mad because of the way the New York Times framed his David Duke interview. And I think he's right, because I don't think they described it accurately initially. But look at the way Cenk talks about the mainstream media. Like, I pointed this out before, when supposedly Bloomberg floated out the idea of having Hillary Clinton as his VP candidate, Cenk was like, look at the media, they're drooling all over this. It's like, no, literally the story was out for 12 hours before it was debunked. The media didn't even talk about it, but Cenk somehow knew what everybody knew. But he gets away with it because he doesn't point out specific people. He just says establishment or corporate media. He just makes it all vague so he doesn't get called on his bullshit.
And look, on this platform, we all do that occasionally. Like, I say the left sometimes, and it is too broad, but that's like half the segments on his show. And he'll do a thing where he reads a quote where they'll talk about like Bernie Sanders. They'll say, well, he's very vulnerable on his socialist past. They'll write that down in an article. And Cenk will be like, translation, they want to keep their tax cuts. And it's like, that's not what he said, Cenk.
Right. Also, just on the point of they want to be like Norway, I really think that's unfair because, they want the Green New Deal to switch us all to green energy. And if there's one country that's done that, it's Norway for sure. I'm joking. Of course, they're one of the largest oil exporters in the world.
Yeah. And one thing that's so odd, like Kyle's like, okay, I want, Kyle's like, if Biden wants my support, he needs to come in favor of there's a reason why, like, when Obama endorsed Bernie, he talked about like environmental stuff. And Kyle was like, there's a reason why he didn't mention Green New Deal. Like, try to pinpoint, like, Kyle thinks like, oh, because he thinks he's trying to be intellectual. He tries to overwhelm you like with big brain type of stuff. He's like Medicare for all, free college, living. He like lists off all these policies.
He's a policy wonk. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like he says but he's not like he's more of like a policy like title wonk. He does like, okay, Green New Deal. Okay, let's focus on that. This is like this is the whole economy, because this is like we're gonna focus exactly. What do you mean by Green New Deal? I'll admit he'll probably say, well, that means, I want all energy to come from renewable sources. Okay, how are we going to get to that point? He's like, he'll probably be like investments in like solar panels. And then like, and then obviously, these people don't support like a carbon pricing system or nuclear energy or, natural gas. They're like ban that, which is, political suicide, but anyway, so it's just, they might see, and Medicare for all, healthcare is like, 18% of like our entire economy. It's like, let's just say Medicare for all. It just seems like, it's now maybe there's a difference between like campaigning and like actually like policy. So if you're talking about like when people run on stuff, maybe they have a point about making, because people don't vote based on policy, and they especially don't vote based on like details of policy.
Yeah.
But if you're going to talk about like the merits of that policy, like you can't just like throw that out and just 20% of the whole economy, basically just like, it could be fixed with one simple wand. It's like when Trump's like, who knew that it could be so like healthcare could be so complex. Well, because so healthcare is like this huge thing. So it isn't. So these he wants to say he's like a policy wonk and all that, but he's not. He's just kind of not good.
Well, what I find funny, and the same applies for the Green New Deal when it comes to polling. When before they proposed it, they're like, the polling shows the American people want a Green New Deal, and it's like, yeah, because you called it the Green New Deal, and I don't know about you guys, but I went to public school. Every single public school student in this country learned about how amazing FDR's New Deal is.
Yeah,
and green, that's like clean energy, right? Who doesn't support that? But the exact point that you brought up about nuclear power shows that, and natural gas, shows that this is ideology and moral based rather than about policy. Because if you were interested in green or in carbon neutral energy that could be plugged in today without massively overhauling the economy, you would advocate for nuclear. And there's a lot of things that the government could do to make that more possible. And if you wanted an energy that's cost barrier is too high but works, that you could subsidize, that would be the one that you argue for. But nothing. It's nuclear. It's scary. Like bombs? No.
The one thing sorry, go ahead.
I said this on Sean's channel when I was there. Kyle is I don't think he's dumb, but he is a superficial person's idea of a policy wonk. He thinks because he uses these buzzwords and, cites these studies, supposedly, really he's just reading articles about the studies, that makes him this in the weeds type guy. What he's pretending to be actually exists. So you're all familiar with Vox. I know a lot of people don't like Vox, but a lot of leftists don't like Vox either because they were largely not supportive of the Bernie Sanders agenda. Right. They have a podcast called In the Weeds where they literally not literally go into the weeds, but where they really go into policy detail, and they actually like read over these policy papers. So, and they're center left, or they're left of center, I should say. So, and it turns out, guys, this will be crazy, but it turns out there are lots of trade-offs with policy. Turns out that things aren't as simple as they seem, as politicians make them seem. So that's why they publish these articles that were critical of Bernie Sanders.
Right.
But of course, David Sirota, Bernie Sanders is one of his fucking hitmen, was like, oh, this is because Goldman Sachs advertised on their podcast, which they did. But that because they did that, everything that Vox has ever said critical of Bernie Sanders can be dismissed. But yeah, so like what Kyle's pretending to be actually exists, and
he doesn't like those people.
Yeah, and if you actually do the thing he's pretending to do, you realize the world's a lot more complicated than people have made it.
Yeah, but isn't it just more sensible to say pick a number of people that will die if you don't obey their policies?
And that's true. Yeah,
that over and over again. And I just want to double up on that. He's making more points. He doesn't actually get into policies or trade-offs or anything like that, because again, it's about moral issues. And the point that I was trying to make before I round about it to it is that you can't call yourself a policy wonk and at the same time say that Bernie Sanders is America's dad.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was the most cringe thing in the universe. The only time I've ever seen him criticize Bernie was when he said he didn't want to legalize heroin. That's like the only time he like disagreed with Bernie before he started criticizing Bernie for not criticizing Biden. Yeah, that's like the only, and he's like, oh, Bernie, like, Jesus Christ, this was like more cringe than anything he ever said. Like, oh my Lord, I had to get that off my chest. It was so annoying. I really did. Oh yeah, and speaking of when we were talking about the environment thing, I really like this this thing they use in Europe. They call it watermelon politics in terms of the Green parties there. What that means is they're green on the outside. They're the Green Party, but really what they're actually, the core value of it is red for socialism. So basically they don't really care for the environment. They're pushing environmentalism for the purposes of restructuring the economy. So it's mostly socialism, but like we're going to put an environmental face on it. It's not actually about the environment.
Which is what the Green New Deal was.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
I got a good one of those for you too. It's they're traffic light communists. They say go green because they're too yellow to admit that they're red.
That's good. I like that.
I didn't make that up, but it's one of my favorites.
That's good.
And the other thing that, like, just this, we're kind of going off to just environment, but quickly here, the in Germany they shut down like a bunch of their nuclear power because of the Green Party, and now they're actually using more and more coal. So they actually shot themselves off in the foot because they're like, they try to be so wonky and all that, and like opposing nuclear power. Nuclear power is based. So
to give you because I've done a video specifically on those numbers. So France, in terms of, they've spent it over time, so it wasn't all at once. But if you adjust for inflation, they spent about half the money that the Germans did on their clean energy program. But they went for nuclear, and they produce double the amount of electricity. They're like 97% of their grid is carbon neutral energy, which is nuclear, and it's half the cost. Germany, obviously, they spent double on solar, wind, and all that. And their carbon emissions went up. And the reason they went up is because when you shut down, they went up. The only reason Germany's went down initially is because they shut down the old Soviet coal-fired plants before the Berlin Wall fell. And those were obviously disgusting because in reality, communist environmental standards are garbage. Yeah. But they lost almost all of the gains from shutting down those by shutting down 4 nuclear plants.
Wow.
It's really is amazing like how much cleaner nuclear power is than even solar or wind, because when they don't work, they have to pump either coal or natural gas into the grid because, it's not like you can't have power in your country for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of, we're going to use this as a ramp to we're going to go from Bernie and, his stupidity to kind of the fundamental underpinnings of the progressive movement as a whole. So let me see. I have a few notes where we're going to start here. So basically in terms of like why is it that, like why, so like some underpinning, like I guess where we could start is that I think we mentioned this a few times, that they're popular, that their policies are popular, and that if everything was fair and everything was equal, they would win. So I'll let you guys kind of take down that point, or, give your thoughts on that matter.
So I think one of the reasons why the left gets in so much trouble or has so much trouble succeeding, and I'm talking about the online left here, is they can't help but tear each other apart. As a libertarian, I know a thing or two about cannibalizing and excommunicating one another. But I've talked about this before. They basically think that the only reason why anyone would just disagree with them, because their policies work and because their policies are popular, the only reason anyone would ever disagree with them is because they're bought off. So let's say, they believe in a single payer, okay? And Joe Biden wants to lower the Medicare age to 50 and make a public option. Well, he only says that because he's a corporate sellout, because everybody knows that single payer works. And so that is a de facto purity test on basically every front. Oh, you don't believe that we should subordinate the entire economy to the federal government to put windmills everywhere? Well, I guess you're in the pocket of big oil and whatever. So that's their mentality. So any disagreement is unacceptable. So that's why they're so rigid in their ideology and they demand purity. And so the end result of that is you get these Jimmy Dores who basically think everybody's a corporatist. It's funny. There's a There are some more intelligent online lefties, more pragmatic ones. Sean's friend Vouch is actually one of them, ironically enough, because
not my friend.
he's a vote blue no matter who, which I'm sorry if you're on the left, that makes sense given the circumstances. And like people like Sam Cedar, who's out there, but he's like, yeah, we got to vote for Joe Biden. If you listen to a debate between Sam Cedar and Jimmy Dore from 2016, Jimmy Dore basically says, hey, if Trump gets elected, it's no big deal because the Democrats can hold up his Supreme Court justices. Well, how did that work out? And then the left will rally around, or the left will get excited and we'll have Elizabeth Warren as our as our nominee in 2020. Well, now, of course, Jimmy Dore thinks that Elizabeth Warren is a corporate neoliberal shill sellout.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show that the goalpost will constantly move with these people and that no one will live up to their standards.
Right. And for the record, Vosh is not my friend. And just because it's funny, I was talking in the stream that I did on my own channel earlier today about how like the blue no matter who makes way more sense than the idea. Like Biden does agree with Bernie on way more positions than Trump does. Like you may get some more protectionism out of Trump and Bernie, but that's like it. And of course, that's what the internet focuses on. I don't know if you heard this, but they're like, the Trump administration is more likely to bring universal health care than the Biden administration. And it's like, so yeah, I agree with that. But however, I will say, I forgot what I was going to say after that.
I was kind of putting the question to both of you about like, what your guys' thoughts on, the idea that they're popular and all things being equal, they would always win.
Yeah, they're like I obviously think that's nonsense. I think in one-to-one policy comparisons, they actually do not fare well when they're put up against their more moderate opponents. And it's Stephen has a good video on this where he explains, he's like, if there's only 6 people in all of Congress, it's not that difficult to win some of these congressional districts, especially when it's a blue district. There's no competition in a general, so there's no risk in voting for a candidate in a primary you actually agree with. Then we wouldn't have like 6 people that these people think are progressive, standard bearers. We'd have way more in the Democratic Party and way more in the inverse on the Republican Party. Or maybe the Republicans would be more progressive. I'm not exactly sure how we're the most popular, that would be reflected if it was just a level playing field. Like they don't win elections because they're not good at winning elections. And this idea that you could say, I'm an FDR Democrat, I think that works in terms of propaganda, but like that doesn't make Bernie Sanders an FDR Democrat. It just doesn't make it so.
I will admit that, I'm going to be voting for Trump in 2020, so this is kind of shooting myself in the foot here, but it does make sense for progressives to vote blue no matter who. It's if I was like voting, like let's say, if I was voting for like a right wing, kind of more hard for far the right guy, and then like some moderate right wing guy came and instead got the nomination. Like you have to kind of look at it as of because fundamentally in the debate about healthcare, what it should be is because their idea is like who's going to get. We want to get more people more healthcare cheaper. Now maybe they might think public option doesn't do that. They still leave some option. Okay, but more people are going to still get it, and So it's a matter of just, fun, because underneath those policies is like certain like values that you kind of, if, for example, if I was voting for someone who's going to reduce immigration, if I want an immigration moratorium, like let's say I want immigration restricted to just 100,000 instead of 1.1 million. And then someone says, well, I'm going to restrict it to 500,000. The idea is less immigration. So it's either,
right.
Maybe it's not as much as I want. So in terms of its, it wouldn't make sense for me. It's like, well, actually, I'm not going to, just because they're not going to go as far as me, I'm not going to vote for them. It's, maybe they're not, it's the fundamental underpinnings are still there. So I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot for arguing for blue no matter who. But
well, I do want to make a point on the not voting, voting for the other guy or not voting to like have a shot in 4 years. If your plan, if your only goal is to get a progressive in the White House, like to be fair, then having Joe Biden win, and there's no way they're going to run another candidate, as long as he's alive. Again, I wish Joe Biden no ill will. I hope he makes it. Like, as long as he's alive, they're not going to run a candidate in the primary. I saw Jank floating that idea that we have to seriously start thinking about primarying Biden. That's not going to happen. So if your goal is in 2024 to get your person on the board, then that's the one situation where pragmatically it does make sense to vote for the other person. Like if like once, I know this is going to sound petty, but like once Mitt Romney secured the nomination, like I was fine if Barack Obama won another term, because I wanted somebody like a Ron Paul or a Rand Paul to be able to run. Now, obviously that
which worked out great. Yeah.
But like you get like the theory. It's like they'll be further off. Like if you're somebody who wants to run, you don't want to run against if you want to run your person, you want them to run against an empty seat.
Mm-hmm.
And like Trump will be an empty seat by 2024, regardless. Like, you know, he won't be there regardless of what happens. But the idea, the Sanders campaign also, I just want to mention that they keep saying Trump is the most dangerous president in the history of the country. That didn't help Bernie.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. They Michael Tracy made a good point where he said that, like, I think I mentioned this earlier in the stream, but like they made this whole election about, you know, Trump is evil, Trump is bad, Trump, blah 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 blah. Trump is a Russian mobster. You know, the whole thing is that, you know, and then this set up basically like, okay, well, I don't really care if they agree with me or not. You know, I will vote for someone who's going to beat Trump because we need to get him out. And Bernie played into that all the whole time. And so as you mentioned, it's kind of like he bought into the framing and then shot himself with that.
Right.
So the problem with the whole, hey, you know what? 4 years from now, we'll have an empty seat and we'll be able to get our guy in. Politics is so unpredictable.
Yeah.
So in 2004, there were all these articles about how Democrats need to win the religious voters over because George W. Bush rode those guys to the White House. No one in any op-ed said, you know what, there's this black guy named Barack Hussein Obama. We need to get him. He's the answer. And in 2012, there were all sorts of reports about how, hey, we lost. The Republicans said we lost because we lost Latinos. We need to soften up on immigration. That's what their autopsy said. No one said, hey, let's get this game show host who's super tough on immigration. That's how we'll win. Now, on the point of FDR and Bernie Sanders and the modern day left being disciples of FDR, I want to read from the Wikipedia article about the New Deal coalition. Franklin D. Roosevelt forged a coalition that included the Democratic State Party organizations, city machines, labor unions, blue-collar workers, minorities, including Jews, Southern and Eastern Europeans, and African Americans, farmers, white Southerners, segregationists, people on relief, and intellectuals. So that is, like, in American politics, the most legendarily diverse coalition there ever was. And FDR pulled a rabbit out of his hat. These are the people who want to kick Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren out of the party because they're not doctrinaire enough.
Oh, these are the people that are starting to go after Ocasio-Cortez for saying that Pelosi is mama bear in the Democratic Party.
Right. They, again, and I know we've talked about this several times this stream, and I don't want to be a broken record, but they are not doing themselves any favors by believing that they're popular when they're not. They think they already have consensus and that the problem is a matter of communication. So that's why they're always going after the media. That's why they're always going after campaign finance reform, because people you can't run 30-second TV ads calling us on our bullshit. So, and really their problem is they don't have consensus. They need to get people on board with their agenda. And that means compromising. That means giving people, some stake in what you're doing. Kyle was talking about how the civil rights movement really forced LBJ's hand. And it's true, the civil rights movement was very important in getting the Civil Rights Act passed. It's also true that Lyndon Johnson got organized labor on board by offering them tariffs on Japanese vehicles. Right. Like, that's how politics is done in America. You build consensus, you build a coalition. You don't constantly shoo people away and demand that they subordinate themselves to every demand you make. That's the recipe for getting second in the Democratic primary every election cycle. And that's where they'll be as long as they have that mentality.
And to dovetail that, like Martin Luther King went out of his way to try to convince like people who hated him that it was in their best interest to support a civil rights a bill. Like he was pushing the idea that this is in forwarding the the interest of the founding fathers and the Constitution that they wanted to preserve. So he was reaching out to literal segregationists to try to change their mind, and they're throwing out Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
And in terms of that corruption thing, it seems like they're the perfect, like their policies are the perfect ones, and then everyone who doesn't believe them is corrupt. There's a few. So this is like kind of the next thing I wanted to talk about. This whole like everyone's bought off. I made a tweet about this earlier. I thought it was pretty clever about it. So you know how I think I sent it to you guys, but you know how
I know the tweet you're talking about. I liked it, but go on.
It's so for those who don't know, I tweeted that. So part of this universal healthcare package. Now everything under the sun is covered, and then they ban private insurance. But the one thing that Kyle says he does not want covered under his Medicare for All proposal is cosmetics. So for example, the government is going to pay for you to get your dick enhanced or something, or now. You could say that maybe this is just some logical position that, he came to. Maybe this is just something he legitimately believes in, but I don't believe that. I think he was bought off by like the Viagra industry or something.
Yeah.
And he was bought off by big cosmetic. I don't see why, like, I don't think this is legit. Why else? Why would he oppose it? I don't think this is legit. I think he was bought off by it.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with like, if everything was just based on money, that everyone's positions are based on money, why doesn't the NRA like give money to the Democrats? Why doesn't Planned Parenthood give money to the Republicans?
Yeah.
If they could just sway them, or it could be that they have constituencies that they rely on, and they're like, okay, these people have legitimate opinions, and we're going to give them money so they could win. It's the opposite. They vote. They're giving money because they think they actually believe what they believe. It's not like these guys are blank slates and we're going to give them money and then they turn into what we want.
The NRA is the biggest in terms of money in politics. There are a few issues which are like concentrated benefits, dispersed losses situations where like farmers getting corn subsidies, where like that's the case and they know when their subsidies are coming up and they're getting votes. But the NRA is the biggest misnomer of money in politics in human history, because there are people, first, if you just poll people on what issues are important to them, people who are pro Second Amendment, that's their number one issue. That's their deal breaking issue. People who are pro like gun control, it's almost never their number one issue. It's almost never their top 15 issue. And you can actually see this represented in the 2016 primary and in this current primary, because who's not that anti-gun historically? Bernie Sanders. And yet he's the standard bearer of the progressive movement. In fact, Bernie Sanders won his independent run because Vermont only has one congressional seat. Like his big start in statewide politics came because he was less anti-gun than the other person, and the NRA gave him a better rating. But that rating just told people who are pro-gun that Bernie was more trustworthy on this issue. Like the amount of money they gave was negligible. And there's other campaigns on the other side that spend more money. You could measure out the dollars. The Brady campaign, Bloomberg's Moms Against Action, Bloomberg's Moms Against Illegal Guns, Bloomberg's other group that's named something that does not match his thing. Like it's like that. They overwhelm them in money and they lose because the gun issue is a voting issue. It's like abortion. Like the people who are pro-life, they don't need you to spend money to tell them to vote pro-life. Like that's who they are and that's what they're voting on.
Yeah. I love also another thing about the whole money in politics thing. I love the implicit assumption that there's one agenda of the moneyed interests. It's not like there are competing agendas. So like, look at tariffs, for example. Does the steel industry like that there are tariffs placed on Chinese steel? Of course they do. Who wouldn't? Does Walmart like that happened? No, because that means that China is going to place retaliatory tariffs. Where does Walmart get all of its shit? China. So it's like you have two big corporations that have very different views on one policy item. So it's like, and go down the line, even within industries. Look at what happened to the airline industry in the 1970s. Those that flew exclusively domestically wanted to deregulate. Those who did international flights wanted to keep the regulation because that kept more of their competitors out of that market. So it's like the idea that these industries are just handing out money to these corporatists and that they're getting them to do what they want. Well, then, even if that was the case, we would still have massive disagreements. So this idea that there's the will of the people and then the corporate agenda is just a fallacy.
Right.
Another thing one thing you mentioned also is so one thing Kyle always riles against is corporate socialism, or corporate, like where the government gives stuff to businesses. Like I wonder what his thoughts are, like when we do this Green New Deal and we have to start giving installing tons of solar panels, tons of wind. Like who's creating these solar panels?
I'm sure GE would love the Green New Deal so that they can make more and more wind turbines. Like that's exactly my point. Thank you. It's like, it's going to be a corporate boon for the people who make solar panel cells and those who make batteries and those who make windmills and all that shit.
Yeah, there was some very deceptive. If you remember when all those companies paid no taxes this year, a lot of that's really deceptive because a lot of those companies didn't make profit until for the first time that year, and you deduct your losses from previous years. It's corporate accounting. But GE, when they didn't pay taxes that year under Obama, it was because they were they paid a net rate of 0 in taxes. It's because they were getting green energy subsidies for solar panels. That was the big deal breaker that put them over the top.
And that's the thing. A lot of these, when they're trying to socially engineer policies, there's always if you hire this, if you have this much minorities, we'll give you a tax credit, or if you do this much green energy, we'll give you this, or if you decide to do that, it's kind of like carrots and sticks, and they're like the company, they want to make money, so they're like, hey, okay. I mean, sometimes it does what it wants, but you have to understand this is if you want the economy to do something, like for example, have more women or minorities in leadership boards, or you want to be more green energy or whatever progressive policy idea you want, you're going to have to give money to corporations because they're the ones who run the economy. Right. So it's kind of weird that they, everyone's bought off, and then but when they want something and they have interest, it's apparently it's not there anymore.
Right.
In terms of another thing is, so let's say Bernie does, let's say progressive does get elected. So this is apparently the their whole idea of change is that apparently they're gonna there's gonna be a march on Washington once Bernie gets if Bernie got elected, and then they're gonna strong arm Mitch McConnell into supporting the Green New Deal or something. Yep. So what do you kind of explain your thoughts on their kind of views on let's say let's just say they won and everything, once they actually just power politics, just the day-to-day activities of people in Washington, just how are they wrong on that front?
President Bernie Sanders is going to make some heroic speeches, and everybody's going to fall in line because the American people are going to march on Washington and do a general strike. And so we're going to get a Green New Deal and a $15 minimum wage, and we're going to end the wars and Medicare for all. Of course, I'm being facetious, obviously. It's fun. This just goes to show that they don't know how politics works. They think it's really just about what you say. Sean mentioned earlier, Jank going trench warfare. Every time I've heard him say oh, we're going to war, the fight is on. It's what he means is he's just saying stuff more vituperatively. Yeah. Literally on his Twitter feed, he'll just be trench warfare. It just means he'll call out who their donors are, and which he did to Christy Smith during his campaign, and he got 5% of the vote. It's funny. I've actually heard Kyle say one thing that's semi-realistic. He goes, yeah, when Bernie Sanders is president, he'll go to Joe Manchin and he'll say, okay, I'm going to support a primary opponent against you. If you don't vote with us, if you do vote with it, you've got my support. What's the difference between that and Pete Buttigieg endorsing Joe Biden?
Right.
There's no difference. He's lending his support to somebody. It's just that one person is working on behalf of the will of the people. The other one is a corrupt corporatist, socialist, or neoliberal hack. There's no difference there fundamentally, but yeah, they have a totally naive view of politics.
Right. And Stephen and I have talked about this before. I actually talked about this earlier today on a different stream, but you could tell that the progressive left, their favorite show is West Wing.
Yep.
That's their view of politics, that you just get the president, he comes out, he gives an impassioned speech, he looks dead in the camera, he emotes a little bit, maybe a teardrop comes down, and everything is sunshine and rainbows right there. That's literally their view of everything. I've said this point like 4 times today, so I'm not going to go any further.
You just need to say the right combination of words in front of the right group of people, then everything else falls in line.
Yeah.
And not just that, like, okay, let's say they like everything is true. They could strong arm all the more moderate Democrats. Like, what about the Republicans? Like, he can't like go into like he's like, I'm going to primary you. It's like, you have no, like, you're a Democrat. They're not going to. So, but I think Kyle legitimately believes that like even like Republican voters are like, yeah, we're going to support the Green New Deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the people in West Virginia whose their entire livelihood is based on coal.
Yeah,
like they're
he's going to train them to be programmers or whatever. Yeah,
you don't understand. Bernie Sanders is going to go to like a state like Kentucky, and he's going to say, you know, coal state. He's going to say, Mitch McConnell, he doesn't represent you. He represents his donors.
You got fooled when you elected him. You just got fooled by the coal lobby. You wanted him, or you didn't want him. But I love how he talks about how, yeah, he's like, you know, Bernie Sanders, he's going to have like a 60% approval rating when he gets inaugurated, which he probably would. Every president, you know, has a higher approval rating upon inauguration. Joe Manchin, look at his approval rating. It's like 13%. Well, maybe nationally. People don't know who Joe Manchin is nationally. You know who knows who Joe Manchin is? West Virginia voters. Yeah. You know who's probably more popular in West Virginia? Joe Manchin. You know who Joe Manchin gives a shit about? The people who actually vote for him. The people of West Virginia. It's like that sort of national politics, honestly, is sometimes looked down upon in states. Like, oh, what the fuck is the president doing here? We don't give a shit about him. Get him out of here. I remember when Scott Walker and all the state senators were recalled back in, what was that, 2010? I don't know if you guys remember that.
Yeah.
A lot of people resented the fact that the National Democratic Party took interest in that, and they voted for Scott Walker and Republican state senators for that reason.
And he won his re-election because of that.
Yeah.
So he was elected 3 times because of the recall. He might have only been elected once.
Yeah.
I missed one part in your statement, because who gave the speech from the White House to get Joe Manchin elected in the first place?
Wasn't it Bernie Sanders? I don't know.
You know, he's the most popular senator in the country, right?
This is true. Yeah.
Most popular.
You're most popular by far.
But yeah, like it's an immature thing. Like, I remember when Rand Paul was running for Senate in 2010, because I followed that campaign. And Rand Paul, after he won the nomination, he was like, "Hey, Obama, do you want me to pay for your ticket to come campaign in Kentucky?" Because Obama was toxic at that point. So the idea that the president is going to go to any state and sway the voters against their representative that they've chosen, much less the opposing party senator that's going to go to a president that's going to go to a state that they're not popular and turn everything around on that. It's ridiculous. And it's magical thinking based on Bernie Sanders actually being Martin Sheen from the West Wing.
Right. It just goes to show that so many people on the left have a myopic view of the country. They think that some opinion poll that says 72% of Americans want green energy, that means that people in West Virginia and Wyoming and Louisiana are going to go to vote for, you know, a uber socialist. It's not going to happen. Sorry. And
it's you also have to go into the weeds of those policies too. Like, they might be in favor, like all these ideas. I will admit, like universal health care, you know, 100% renewables. That all sounds fine. I mean, I agree with those things, but you know, it's the nitty gritty. Like when you actually get down to the dust about it, that, you know, when people actually start, what is that? I actually have to pay more in taxes. Like they could obfuscate, like, well, actually, you don't understand. You're actually going to save money. You're going to save money. And okay, you could be true to that, but like, you know, in terms of campaigning, they're like, well, I didn't know I was going to have to lose my insurance and actually pay more in taxes. I didn't know that. So then that entire thing blows away, you know. And I think Sean kind of explained that in his healthcare video. So it's they're lacking nuance in terms of, they think if they just keep saying Green New Deal, Medicare for all, everyone just, you know, get on board and, you know, everyone supports that. If they could just obfuscate and just, you know, just like kind of put a veneer on like what it would actually entail.
We have somebody in the chat saying Bernie's America's dad, though.
Yeah.
So owned with facts and logic.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Sorry, I can't be mean to my dad. Sorry.
But yeah, no, I 100%. Like I totally agree with what you're saying, that they overstate the popularity of their policies. They don't try to build a broad enough coalition. They're too quick to kick people out. And I mentioned this, and I don't know how much of an impact it had because I don't believe a lot of the Twitter politics has a big impact. But the tendency of Bernie Sanders supporters to imply that they might get violent if Bernie won the plurality and not the majority, and they decided to go with somebody else. I'm sure that didn't help.
Oh yeah. That's the other thing. I forgot to mention this when we were talking about how they're not supposedly moderate and they're actually like has Marxist sympathies. When Bernie like officially dropped out, like Kyle retweeted a bunch of people. Like one person is like me after Bert, the Simpson meme where he like goes
the
in.
Bush one.
Yeah. So like Simpson's like wearing like a Bernie t-shirt. He goes in, he comes out like wearing like Antifa, like black clad like armor, and it has like a freaking like Molotov cocktail. And he's like, and then Kyle's like, so he's like, if Bernie gets the like plurality and they're like trying to steal it from him, I don't endorse violence, but I can't promise that it's like a mafia thing.
It's a veiled threat. No, it'd be a shame if something happened to your city. Yeah.
So in terms of I'm trying to figure if there's anything else another thing I put down that he said is that we're the moderate ones. Everyone, the Joe Biden type of people, they're the extremist ones.
Yeah. So we've basically hit on that, but I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to it.
No, I just want to say, as far as the violence in Milwaukee goes, I will be at the DNC. Hopefully it still happens. Yeah. And I know Sean is very skeptical that they're going to switch out Biden. And I think there's a 99% chance that he's right. But I'm holding out hope because I've never been in a riot and I always wanted to see what it's like.
I hope the DNC happens because I'm going to be at the I keep saying the Minds event, but Minds was the last one, the Mythicist event down there. Mm-hmm. And I'll actually get to meet Steve in person if it happens, because I'll be flying out to Milwaukee. But I'm not hoping for a riot because I never hope for that. But at the same time, if I happen to get some stellar footage while I'm there, mm-hmm. I won't, as long as nobody gets hurt, blah blah blah. Everybody knows I'm denounce and reject. But at the same time, I've never been in a riot either.
Hey man, I have a gas mask, so if they bring tear gas, I'm good. Oh.
Tear gas is not fun. I was tear gas before it wasn't.
I believe that.
I assumed it wouldn't be fun. I have to actually figure out if I'm going to take the chance and schedule my flight to come out for the DNC full or just the event. But I don't remember where they are in proportion to one another.
The event is the Saturday after the DNC. The DNC believe goes from Tuesday to Friday of that week. Yeah,
I might consider that because I might be like figuring out like what I'm gonna do with Nuance Bro before. I might coordinate that.
I have that entire week off of work, so I'm planning on being in Milwaukee the entire week. So
right. I have to figure out what everybody's gonna do because everybody has their own thing. Mm-hmm. Some people go out that are going to be at the event or go out and film stuff like this. I don't usually do that. I'm a shut-in. But
one thing I actually I forgot to mention about Bernie's going to strong arm. Even if that was true, let's say that theory is true, that if he could just strong arm everyone, he just speaks and then, the eagle drops on his shoulder. Maybe if a bird dropped on his podium one more time, he would have won this time. But the thing is, but what that forgets is that Bernie doesn't even have the balls to even do that. He did go after Hillary for the emails. Mm-hmm. He did go after Joe Biden for dementia, maybe even if you think it's all BS, he didn't actually go scorched earth and what's going to happen is he's going to be okay, let's say he's okay, guys, I want you guys to sign this. I want you guys to go in front of DC and say, Mitch McConnell, I want $15 minimum wage. And then somehow maybe having a few, people protesting is going to change the idea, the minds of these people. Right. So it's not like so even if that whole thing was true, he doesn't have the balls to even strong arm and make it happen. So before, we start wrapping things up, what are some other kind of flaws that we kind of hit on a lot of them, but if there's something we didn't mention that you guys want to bring up?
Look, Bernie comes off as a nice guy and everything, but
definitely.
Bernie is a socialist, and that belief amongst your support base that you have an absolute moral imperative to push your policies like we're joking about it, like how they think it's like West Wing, but they might think that it's the same moral imperative that every other socialist regime had when they took into power. So, you know, you might get a march on Washington, but it might look nothing like what Bernie is describing. Like, I'd like to think most people are just lazy and all that. But, you know, there's people that left his campaign the next day and they're like, mask off, Democratic nothing. Like, that literally happened.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, as this primary has shown, that like people didn't come out to even just vote for Bernie, let alone like, okay, we're gonna like go out all the way to DC and like camp out for like a few weeks to like, or even just like Kyle's idea is like, okay, we're gonna all do a general strike. Like, okay, retard. But you know, the whole
people
thing.
People are trying to go to work right now.
Yeah,
and they might get sick.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna protest so to get rid of my private health insurance and lose my job. But the thing is so is there anything else that you guys would add, like, in just something that we haven't mentioned, or something you want to add on before we move on to like final thoughts and conclusions and everything?
I'll say one more thing. Twitter is not real life, and I sincerely hope that after this election we'll finally realize that. Some people do still think it's real life, and you know the reputation of Bernie supporters on Twitter is that. Sorry, I've been drinking beer in case you couldn't tell. The reputation of Bernie supporters online is that they're sexist and they're racist. The Bernie Bros narrative. I have no idea if that's true. I'm sure that the people of color and the women of the world have been attacked by Bernie Sanders supporters. I have no idea if that's disproportionate among Bernie Sanders or if they're just making it up. What I will say, what I've seen, is that they are so quick to call people sellouts and corporatists and shills. I remember, Chris Cuomo on CNN is one of the few people who will invite people from TYT onto his show. He's been good to them. In one interview, he gave Anna a little pushback, and he got assaulted by TYT fans on Twitter to the point where Anna had to call him out. She's like, "It's okay, guys. Chris is a good guy." You just need to overstep just a little bit, and you will fucking have fury rain down on you from all these idiots. So that, like, them being so abrasive on Twitter has not helped, and it has not helped with the media and all the rest.
I was gonna say we should get to questions, and you pulled one up.
Did Vouch make you leave, right?
You pull that up. Yeah. Did Vouch make you leave the right? No. I'm actually gonna bite the bullet and do the debate me bro thing with Vouch. He didn't make me leave the right though.
What in terms of like final things, one thing, I should have asked this in the why do you guys think that so we mentioned this before, but why do you guys think that the black vote specifically didn't want Bernie? Like, I actually have no, like, I mean, are they just fun? Like, I know, like, for like are they just fundamentally more like, is there, like, why is it, because they're so unison and like they like almost so, and also why were they white working class so anti-Hillary but pro Bernie, but now they're all right with Biden?
I have a theory. The overwhelming conclusion of the book Politics for Realists is that people vote based on identity. And in the case of Black Americans, their identity is focused on their skin color. And they're very unique in America like that. And so in their case, they probably supported Joe Biden because he was Barack Obama's VP. And because Barack Obama considered him a very good friend and all that. Why the white working class didn't like Hillary? Well, they did like Hillary in 2008. They overwhelmingly sided with Hillary. And then in 2016, they sided with Bernie. And then in 2020, they went with Biden. So I assume it's just, their identity is probably built around their jobs more than anything, the white working class, that manufacturing.
Right.
So I assume it's just because of that. Just they think that person has a better rapport with that sort of ideology. That'd be my guess.
What about you, Sean? What's your thoughts?
Biden has always historically been popular among white working class voters. That's why I said Biden would probably win if he would have ran after Obama. He would probably won the primary and beat Donald Trump. Plus, he spoke better. The black support, black people tend to support the more democratic establishment candidate or somebody that they know more. And being Obama's VP didn't hurt. Hillary has the perception of the Clintons, NAFTA, and trade agreements, and GATT, according to Kyle Kalinske. Michael Davis.
When Hillary was 6 days old.
Yeah, when she was 6 days old, she passed a trade agreement that gutted the middle class. But so she has all that stain on her amongst those people, and Bernie kind of speaks that language, but Joe Biden speaks that language, and he also doesn't seem like a kooky socialist. Mm-hmm. So they backed up. By the way, a lot of black supporters early in the primary backed Hillary over. That's how strong the Clinton name was over Obama. It wasn't until Obama seemed like a candidate that could actually win the primary that they switched to him. So sure. It's very much like they want a winning candidate, and black Democrats are more moderate than white liberals. It's just the most radical people in the Democratic Party are white people.
Oh yeah,
that's Bernie's constituency, college-educated white liberals.
Yes,
and
not even. It's also in terms of the. It's also like the over. What do you actually think? It's actually kind of odd. I think Bernie and Biden's base. I think I heard this earlier in the primary that their basal support was actually kind of similar. It's kind of like it was the Pete and Warren who were those overly woke kind of like college-educated white liberal type of people. But I think it's the difference between Joe Biden, I think that ultimately went out against Bernie, is that the Joe Biden support was actual authentic people who, don't care about, they just want, someone who says, union stuff and everything and is moderate. They're not a socialist, but the other people might be white and they might be working class or poor, but they're more of this kind of like, I don't know how to exactly describe it. They're just overly political or something. They're like these political activists or something.
Right. Part of it is people do have party loyalty. Party loyalty matters. And so given the fact that Joe Biden was the vice president to a guy who won twice by quite a bit, gives him good credibility amongst the people who care about the Democratic brand. Whereas Bernie Sanders has never been a Democrat. So that goes against him there. That would be part of my theory. I think a lot of those constituents you're talking about buy into the Democratic Party as a brand.
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't disagree with that. Do you want to do like questions, since there are people asking different things that?
Oh yeah, sure. Let's if you guys have any questions, just send them in the chat, and I'll base. I mean, there's almost 100 people watching, so that's actually a lot, at least for me. I mean, you guys probably like that's punny, that's peasant type of stuff, but that's a lot.
It's actually really high. I did a stream today and it was like 400. And if you proportion that out, it's not that much more.
Oh wow! So let me look through the questions people asked throughout the chat as they start here, because the live stream is like
Clinton Austin is a patron of mine, so he should get priority. I'm just saying.
It's me. Whose channel is this? It's I'm the one hosting on Ingrisky. Okay, so let's see. What do you guys think of so maybe this is just me visiting the neoliberal subreddit, but I actually think Biden actually has like a kind of like I know this isn't really meme much, but it's like his meme brand kind of about the no malarkey type of thing. I actually think that's kind of like genius. I really like it. Like his like no nonsense kind of folksy type of thing. I kind of like it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it has like that weird appeal that George Bush had almost. Like it's like not really cool, but it's personable.
Yeah.
Ooh, do you remember Ken Bone?
Yes.
Yeah, he was in one of the debates between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and he was this independent who wore a big old sweater, and for some reason people liked him. Because he's folksy. And that, I think people get the malarkey. When Joe Biden says, cut your malarkey, people think it's folksy and they think it's authentic.
So the first question that came in is, do you guys love black people?
Jesse Lee Peterson. I love black people. Yeah.
I love people of all color, Jesse.
Next question is, do you think Bernie knows his shit? or is he just a fraud? I actually think he's one thing I know we've been trashing Bernie everywhere, but I actually legitimately like him in the sense that I actually legitimately think that he's a authentic guy who actually believes what he believes in. He is true to his word. I have no doubt in my mind that he will fight for what he believes in, and he's true to his word. I don't think he's like bullshitting people. I think he has his core beliefs, and he's going to push them if he gets elected. So I think he's actually a good guy. I mean, in terms of just, we might think he's wrong, but I think he's actually a good guy who just has beliefs. I don't think he's a fraud.
I think he's a legitimate. I think he's actually more radical than he implies publicly. I think he knows. I think Bernie is aware of the polling based on how he sells his program versus what he avoids talking about. Because if you map the polling, what Bernie says to support it is exactly what polls well, and I don't think that's coincidence.
I always got the impression that he's a TB, a true believer.
Yeah.
From Alcazai. Why do you think progressives are so condescending, considering they say constantly white working class people vote against their own interests?
Because they honestly do believe that they know better how to live your life and run your life than you do.
Yep, I agree.
Are you going to debate Vosh?
I'm setting it up right now. The tentative situation is yes. Like he said yes. I said I'll debate you, bro, because that's what people do on the internet now. But nothing scheduled. I popped in to like correct a few things about my position on his stream today. But yeah, well, I'll announce that. Like, come on, guys.
How intelligent is Chank's nephew?
Steven?
Oh yeah,
I always got the impression that he's a fucking moron. I'll be honest. Like,
I mean, that's actually good. I'm gonna add on to that. What do you guys think is the most insufferable progressive?
We talked about this last time, Sean.
Yeah, I know, and we kind of weaseled. We didn't get a good answer. Oh,
I think
you know what? We did. So I agree with Steven that it's not necessarily their policies that make them insufferable. If you're like going to rate them on human beings, I would say some people at the Majority Report are probably worse.
Yeah.
But if you're going to rate them on what really matters, which is watchability, then your Humanist Report, is David Doyle the Humanist Report guy?
No, Humanist Report is Mike Figueredo.
Right.
David Dole is the Rational National.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
And Mini Jank.
Progressive voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, yeah.
I always think Chank's nephew is like AIU like ripped him a new asshole. He was like, he's just such a like a wannabe like the quintessential it's like, oh, the champagne socialist types. It's like this guy's like this guy who lives off his dad's like or his aunt's.
He got to start there. He does make money on his own.
Oh, he does. But he's like this quintessential. It's like AIU was like, talking about like he was like on the Chank's program. He's like, we need like to arm the proletariat or whatever.
Yeah, I remember that clip.
like a LARPing retard. But anyway, yeah, he just seems like he's like Hunter Avalon if Hunter Avalon was a Marxist. Question for Sean: do you like Ludwig von Mises?
Yeah, Ludwig von Mises. I pronounce the name terribly, so I'm gonna.
I do too.
He's actually a very interesting guy. I believe he's from Austria, and he moved to the United States when he was like 60, and he taught himself English so he could write books on economics. Very interested. I think Lou Rockwell runs the Ludwig von Mises Institute, if I have that right. I might have just made that last part up, but yeah, I think he's pre-Hayek. Steve probably knows better than I do.
I believe he is pre-Hayek. I have actually I have a book of his and I've read like half of it, but I don't know him too well. A lot of the people who I like to read on economics endorse his views. So yeah. I guess by proxy, I like him.
Yeah. And I do like his personal story. So,
should blacks who lived during Jim Crow in the South receive reparations? I mean, I ain't paying it, but what do you guys think?
Reparations, probably not. Obviously, they got shit on. I don't know if it's other white people's job to pay for that, though. I get that they were put behind. I understand that. And I'm not opposed necessarily to some form of government means of remedying that situation, but I don't know if reparations is it.
I would say for slavery, no. For Jim Crow, if you could show damages for government policies, then I think that you should. There could be an argument made that you should be able to, sue your state and get some compensation for those damages. I don't know how that gets adjudicated, but I'd like to see an argument if you could draw a line from this issue to, this thing and this thing.
So
if you were alive when it happened.
Yeah. So obviously the question is kind of, obviously, when they talk about Jim Crow, this is a bit more because there's people alive who've been through that. So it's a bit different than slavery. Obviously, I'm like 100% against it. And one thing this is actually another criticism of the progressive. We kind of focused on their kind of political campaigning thing. One thing they have wrong is that like and Devin Tracy like goes off about it all the time. He basically what the progressives think is that all the black population is just like. They're like a bug. They're like on their like back and they're squirming around. They need the white liberals to help them like get back on their feet. And the one thing so for example, for Asian Americans, right? When they were, they were discriminated against. Now there was not as much because there was not enough Asian Americans, but there was the Chinese Exclusion Act. There's so many, stuff against Asians. But if you look at Asians today, they vastly they make more money per capita than white people do. They actually are underrepresented in like, they don't use as much welfare. They don't do as much crime. But yet when it comes to like, when they talk about the black population and why they're disproportionately in the criminal justice system and they're disproportionately using welfare, why they're disproportionately have their families out of wedlock, it's somehow the state's fault and the United States' evil past that contributed to that. For me, it's like, we could debate like how much effect America's past has on the current day black population. But I think, if you look at, it's good. In the modern day, it's not the government, some government racist policies that are holding you back. I would say it's almost like, how they're called regressives instead of progressives. Yeah.
It's almost like a recreation in a weird paternalistic way of that like white man's burden tale. Like it's their job to save them from themselves kind of thing. Like,
oh yeah,
it's a paternalistic racism and it's insane.
One thing they also try to like help people when it's not there. It's like, for example, they're trying to, for the Latinos, they're trying to say Latinx or something. It's like they're trying to make like this whole new thing. So I live in like New Mexico, which is like almost a majority Latino state. No one uses Latinx. This is just the upper middle class college white thing.
I'm Hispanic. I can tell you that's not a thing.
It's something white liberals made up to that they thought Hispanic people would care about, which they don't.
It sounds so funny because it's like they're like, we have to clean up that filthy language from downtown. it's like the most racist thing I could think of. It's like the entire language is based on this gendering of words, and also there's already a mechanism in the language to do something gender neutral. Like, so like all love languages, the masculine pronoun the masculine conjugation doubles for a genderless one.
That's sexist.
Who cares?
Is Ahmadi Hassan from Al Jazeera a American agent or an authentic news reporter?
I actually don't know
idea.
Well.
Yeah,
he's the guy who got in a fight with Kyle.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
So I don't know. He and then he was talking to Noam Chomsky about why they should vote for Joe Biden.
Right.
Should the German state be partitioned?
Why? I don't know. We did that before, didn't we? It didn't work out very well.
I actually think that I actually unironically believe that if like, I know this kind of plays into like because I'm kind of more farther right than you guys are, but it's like, if Austria and Germany want to unite or something like voluntarily, I actually would be in favor of that. I think also that it's kind of underpinning on when there was the mass expulsions of Germans from like the Polish area, like when Poland caught in their land and they expelled like millions of Germans back to Germany, like that was like an ethnic cleansing, and no one talks about it because it happened right after the Nazi government fell, and no one really talks about it. So it's actually kind of really sad what happened. So actually, if anything, Germany kind of deserves to be bigger. Gross Deutschland.
I mean, what's the distinction? I feel like the Austrians are Germanic people, but what's like the distinction that makes them into different countries? Like, actually, I'm not.
That's a good question. The thing, I mean, obviously we need a German. We're just talking out our ass here, but you know, at least from what I've seen, it's kind of like Ukraine with Russia. Like, what's a Ukrainian and what's a Russian? Well, you know, they might be similarly ethnically, and they might speak similar languages, but it's like they kind of develop their own kind of sense of separate identity because of historical trends, sort of, I think.
I mean, you can make that, if their language isn't the same, and you know, that's like Spanish and French. They're both Latin-based languages. They're not right next to each other, but close enough, and you know, they're different.
But though it's not even, it's even closer than that too, because it's like, because I believe correctly, if a German spoke to an Austrian, they could still understand each other if they.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know, but honestly, but yeah, that's. I think we're spending too much time on that one. But what's another question? Do you think maybe the Cold War era policy of not trading with communist countries makes more sense in light of recent events?
With the Chi-Coms?
Yeah. We don't really have any real communist countries in the Soviet sense anymore, I would say. Should we marginalize China if that's what you're really asking? Yes, we should.
Yeah, I would be interested in that. And even just from like a security point of view, we talked about this before. It makes no sense to get any critical supplies from a single nation, especially one that is clearly a geopolitical enemy of yours.
Obviously. I agree.
There's a funny question in the bottom. I don't know if you guys see it.
You guys familiar with Hans Hermann Hope, thoughts on his criticism of democracy?
I read his book, Democracy, the God That Failed. I generally think his criticisms are valid. I don't think that we should endorse a monarchy on the way to anarchism. So I think he kind of goes off the rails towards the end there.
Sorry, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not familiar.
For me, I mean, so I'm around in a lot of dissident right circles. Hans Hermann Hope is basically, to me, he is someone who, you know, the thing is like, oh, the libertarian to, you know, alt-right pipeline. All he serves in terms of this is basically libertarians who kind of learned about all this new dissident right stuff, but like can't let go of their libertarianism. So they're like, okay, we're gonna be in favor of like it's like a stepping stone. That's all I see of it. And he's just kind of like, because you can't give up your entire ideology at once. You have to kind of slowly get rid of it. And the way you do that with a libertarian is with Hans Hermann Hope, in my opinion. I don't really like him.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't care for him either.
What's another question? Latinx is whitewashing. That's true.
It's like a Texan talking to New Yorker. Who's the Texan? I mean, Sean's a New Yorker, right?
Austria and Hungary. I'm actually a Texan that moved to New York. So
what? Oh,
I was born in Texas. I've been here since I was 7, but I did notice there was a difference in the way that people talk.
Gotcha.
But is that really the difference between Austria and Germany?
I have no idea. I thought he was referring to our conversation here. I was like, who's he talking to?
The question I was laughing at was, should Turkey recognize the Armenian?
Why you should ask Jank about that one. I don't think
it was a reference to Germany. He clarified the Germany-Australia thing. Austria, sorry.
Australia.
They're the same thing. They should unify into one country.
Trying to find.
I actually wanted to have not in this thing. I actually wanted to point out, like, I'll save it for later. Honestly, it's completely not germane to the topics that we're having.
Any big right-wing commentators you have criticisms of? That's a bit of a.
I mean, like the movement conservatism, I really don't care for. Shapiro's a smart guy, but he does a lot of annoying shit that just rubs me the wrong way. I don't really care for most YouTube right wingers, but that's just me. Sorry to give you a vague answer, but there it is.
I don't know. Like, honestly, I'm in this whole thing because I made a video response about somebody who was a former, I guess, YouTube right winger. I'm not looking to shovel more stuff in my direction right now. I got what I have.
So considering as someone who is I guess you could call me a right wing commentator. As you guys probably know, there's been kind of like this kind of civil war on like who exactly is right wing, who's conservative, and whatnot. To me, a lot of these, as I think what Steve called them, like movement conservatives, like kind of we call it like conservative Inc., conservative incorporated. To me, it's I mean, there's like words matter, and for example, if this is actually one criticism I have is, for example, Bernie calls himself a democratic socialist. Right. It's like if you're gonna call yourself that, like actually I mean well, like what if I called it's like absurd. Like what if I called myself a fascist? Like actually no, what I mean is like I want democracy, but like I want like it's like that makes no sense. You're being disingenuous. So if you're gonna call yourself a conservative or someone on the right wing, you can't like there's a difference between conservatives and libertarians, and a lot of the main crux is a lot of these conservative Inc. guys are really just libertarians in their economic and social views. They're like, I don't care about gay marriage. I don't.
They're not. They might be more economically libertarian, but they're very much economically libertarian combined with tough on crime 90s Republicans. Like a lot of those, except for like the social issues like gay marriage, etc. But if you take every other policy, like strong defense, like all that, it's standard Republican.
I'll say this. I don't care for the mega cheerleaders like Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens. Can't stand them.
I think. I mean, you guys see my videos. I don't talk about Trump because I'm tired of Trump every day. But when I do talk about him, I'm like I like the there's Kirk style tweets where it's like the Democrats have done this, but in reality, this is something else that happened. Why don't the Democrats stand by it?
Retweet if you agree.
Retweet to stop the Democrats from blowing up the country.
Yeah.
Like,
this is kind of directed to Steve. What's your are you gonna make a video on the TPP?
I have a video planned called "The Economy Is Not a Ship." It's kind of touches on that, but will I make a video specifically on the TPP? Maybe at some point. This is the video I'm planning is about something Sean alluded to earlier. It's supply lines and China. So stay tuned for that.
What do you guys think of Germany's economic model of Rhine capitalism?
If I knew that well, I would have an answer for you, but I don't. Sadly,
I'd say same kind of deal.
I don't know international politics too well, so sorry.
Yeah, I heard it. It's just from. I mean, just this is. I'm not an expert either. I just heard good things about it. It's but that's all. I just heard that it's a unique variation. One thing Kyle always says is like everyone. Oh yeah, that's one thing we didn't address is that everyone else in the world is exactly like the perfect utopias, like what Kyle wants, and then we're just the only ones behind. Yeah. Even though like Germany and Switzerland and Netherlands have like multiple, they're like a multi-payer system, and a lot of them they don't have not all of them have free college, not all of them have. It's stupid. What's this? I think he says simpiest politicians, right? Maybe he's trying. Maybe he misspoke.
Who troll? Ted Cruz had that porn tweet, didn't he?
Yeah.
Like I don't know who simps the most out of our politicians.
I honestly, I don't even know. Maybe the politician most worthy of simps.
Tulsi Gabbard gets a lot.
So AMMV channel is somebody I've seen in my comments forever. He's a supporter and all that. So I have no idea what he's alluding to there. But
if his question, who has the most simps, it's Tulsi Gabbard, right? Yeah, gotta be her.
I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is actually really attractive.
She's extremely attractive.
So. I want to say this. I kind of like AOC, like in terms of like if I was gonna.
So do I.
Yeah, she's
So okay, you guys have seen on Twitter all those memes like, which quarantine house are you picking? My mind always goes to like which has the most hot bitches in it.
Yeah, if you saw the PragerU one, I knocked out immediately every house that didn't have a woman in it.
Yeah,
I'm like, first of all, no way. And then I'm like, then you have to factor in survivability. Like if you guys need to work together, who would you want to work with? And I'm like, then you have to factor in, what if you had to kill everyone in order to who would you want to work with? So I ended up picking a house with like Ben Shapiro, Mike Rowe, some old guy, and I forgot which girl I picked. There was a girl in that house, but and it was I don't know who the PragerU girls were, but I know which ones are like more toxic, I guess. Mm-hmm. One was like Candace Owens, and she was in a house that was just like cancer on wheels.
It was Dinesh D'Souza was in that house, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and then there was another one with another woman, and I don't think I knew her, but she had that look of like a Churn Point kind of character. I wasn't sure. So I picked the house, and then people were arguing with me. They're like, "Oh, well, this house with all dudes has a Navy SEAL in it." I'm like, that fits none of my criteria, except somebody to survive with, like I guess. But that fits none of my criteria. I'm not going to kill a 30. I'm not going to maneuver without some trickery a 30-year-old.
Yeah,
I picked olds and Ben Shapiro, who's older than me, and let's keep winning that fight.
Worst Supreme Court decision.
Buck v. Bell, probably.
Buck v. Vallejo.
Oh yeah, whatever.
I know it's Vallejo, but for me,
no, Buck v. Bell was a eugenics decision, wasn't it?
No, never mind. I thought you were doing the Young Turks one, the money in politics one.
No.
Okay, I was like, that's weird.
Buck v. Bell was the eugenics decision. I think that was the worst. What was the one that declared black people less than human or whatever that was?
Plessy versus Ferguson.
Yeah, that was pretty awful.
No, I think Dred Scott. Dred Scott literally. I was doing this. Dred Scott literally was, even if you were a black person born in a free state and you're a free person, you don't even deserve citizenship because you were never meant to be a citizen. So it's not even like slavery was on. It was like you're not even supposed to be.
Dred Scott is from a legal point of view, it's terrible because for obviously morally too. But the court ruled that Dred Scott had no standing to bring suit, and then they ruled on the case, which is a huge no-no, like the merits of the case. So it's like, you can't sue because you're not a person, but also here are some other things that I'm going to add, even though you have no case and you can't sue, and I shouldn't be reviewing this. But separating out the racialized ones, there is one I want to reference, and it's the Wicker case. And that was the case cited to push the individual mandate under Obama's
Wicker v. Filburn.
Yeah, and if I have it correctly, that's the one where a man was growing wheat on his property and he was trying to feed it to his pigs, but it was more wheat than the Roosevelt administration had deemed you were allowed to do that. And they ruled that doing basically anything in commerce is therefore interstate commerce and thus can be regulated by the federal government.
That one led to so much expansion of the federal government because it took it to such an expansive view of the Commerce Clause. As far as like the most dubious legally, and I'm not a lawyer, the most dubious legally might be the Roe v. Wade because they invoked the penumbras or whatever. And so I don't know. People have written about this better than I have. So
I wait to see in the Constitution where you say this says this for the first 6 months. They invented trimesters, by the way. The lawyers invented that. That's not a medical term. They're like, in the first 2 trimesters, the Constitution says this, but then for the last one, it's kind of ambiguous and it's up to the states. It's like I wait for the scholar to do a seance with Thomas Jefferson and figure that out.
Whatever you think about abortion is irrelevant. The case is dubious.
Yeah. All right. I'm getting tired. So like.
Oh yeah, sure. So I think we're let's go to one. Do you guys want to do you guys just want to end the questions now, or?
I mean, you could pick one if you want. I'm just telling you.
I mean, none of these things. What's his debate record is, or I think this is that question. Never mind.
It's worse than that. Whatever he put, it's worse than
that. Who's the most unhinged progressive? I think we mentioned. I guess we said who's the most retarded, but
I think Kyle is becoming more and more unhinged.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that Jimmy Dore, he had I'm sorry. Yeah, Jimmy Dore. He had a Chinese communist propagandist on his show lately talking about how the Chinese Communist Party cured homelessness.
My favorite quote of Roe v. Wade by a dissenting judge, quote, I have never heard of such a principle, nor has anyone else, nor will it ever be heard of again.
Sounds about right.
All right. And lastly, would you with Blair White?
Oh.
No.
I
Oh yeah,
couldn't.
how about this? Are traps gay?
Yes.
Yeah, by definition, they're trapping you, because trapping is really an action that's only capable if you have a certain look to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. They're gay.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. So I guess that's it for the questions. So how should we end this? Do you guys have any final thoughts before we end it?
Just hopefully the convention happens. I hope you're all doing well with the COVID-19, staying afloat. Hopefully we can get back to work soon.
Right. My final thoughts is that it's 1:59:43 right now, and we could end this on 2 hours flat, and I think that's kind of boss if I continue talking, or one or your
okay, let me end it now. Okay, 10 seconds. From Russia. Okay, we're ending it in 5, 4, 3. Okay. From America with Russian love. Bah!